West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Finally, a development on this scary story. We learned right after the Capitol attack from multiple members of Congress that the day before the attack, the day before January 6th, some members of Congress may have given a group of visitors, multiple groups of visitors, access to the Capitol for what amounted to reconnaissance tours ahead of the attack on the building the next day. Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan from Ohio chairs the House subcommittee that oversees the Capitol Police. He's had a leading role in the investigations into January 6th. And today, a reporter from the Washington Examiner asked him about those alleged recon tours given by members of Congress and their staff before the attack. He told the reporter in response that that issue is now, quote, in the hands of the U.S. attorney in D.C. He says that federal prosecutor's office is, quote, reviewing the footage of those alleged recon tours. Okay. Tell me more. Today, Congressman Ryan's committee held a hearing on the breakdown in law enforcement that led to the Capitol being breached. Even after his hearing, there are more questions than answers. But what we did learn definitively today is that the threat posed by the rioters, particularly the ones who broke into the Capitol and then evaded arrest, they still pose a live, active threat to the Capitol. This was the acting chief of Capitol Police testifying at that hearing today.
We know that members of the militia groups that were present on January 6th have stated their desires that they want to blow up the Capitol and kill as many members as possible with a direct nexus to the State of the Union, which we know that date has not been identified.
Head of the Capitol Police saying that militia groups that attacked the Capitol on January 6th want to launch another attack on the day Joe Biden hosts what looks like the State of the Union, his first joint address to Congress, which is expected to take place sometime next month. Joining us now is Congressman Tim Ryan, Democrat of Ohio. He does chair the House subcommittee that has oversight over the Capitol Police. He's been leading one of the inquiries into the January 6th attack. Congressman Ryan, it's nice of you to make time to be here tonight. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So I was interested in this answer that you gave to Washington Examiner reporter. You said that the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. has been reviewing footage about these allegations that members of Congress may have given tours to some of the rioters in advance of the attack. Can you tell us anything more about that?
Yeah, and not really, Rachel. No one ties it together better than you do. But, you know, the U.S. Attorney has the investigation going on now. I'm sure they're looking at the footage. They're looking at everything surrounding that idea of members of Congress taking people on tours. There were other members of Congress who witnessed that happening. So that's in their hands now. And anybody who's dealt with a U.S. attorney doing an investigation, it's like a black box. You really don't know what's going on, but you know what's happening.
It was also new to us today when the new head of the Capitol Police said that they have intelligence that militia members may want to come back and attack the Capitol again on the occasion of the State of the Union, the president's first joint address to Congress. Was that news to you as well? That sent a real shockwave, I think, across the country, everybody who was watching that hearing today.
Yeah, it was stunning. I mean, we hear these kind of threats all the time. The Capitol, members of Congress, especially in the last couple of months, assassinations and all of that, especially after January 6th. But this was new, which is why we got to keep the fence up, which is why we have to keep the National Guard here, which is why we've got to come up with some real hardcore solutions as to how we move forward. We're not ready yet to take the fence down because we don't have a plan moving forward. And I think it's important for the American people, one, to hear these threats. So I, in some sense, appreciate that you're reporting on it because the American people need to know. But the most important thing here, Rachel, these are American citizens. This is not Al-Qaeda. This is not the Taliban. This is not, the Iranians. This is American groups. These are American citizens who are saying these things about taking down the Capitol, taking down representative democracy. And that just shows, I hope, in most people's minds, how far along we are in some of these things and why we have to be so vigilant in trying to figure out how we protect the Capitol.
It is Friday, the 26th of February of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays because we are all night hawks in the Diner of Life. Well, the French 77s are virtually poured because it's still really early in the morning here, and we don't start that early. Sometimes we don't even start at all. But since we're in the spirits meme, it being Friday, the French 77s are virtually poured. Do take care if imbibing in the analog world. Have a friend, okay? You may need each other to prop each other up. If you happen to consume more than two each, do not do that. Sip, okay? And drink plenty of water, too. As we all have found out. Well, talking about headaches, what's going on with the $15 an hour provision in this stimulus bill? Fortunately, the House will continue to have it included, so when it goes to the Senate, I guess they're not going to match up, will they? I have heard some rumblings that the $15 an hour will be a standalone bill no matter what happens. And, well, meaning that no matter what happens with the Senate parliamentarian already deciding, well, it's not part of a reconciliation process. And we will be following the rules because that's what we do. We said that we would honor what the parliamentary said, and apparently we, meaning we Democratic side of the political spectrum, will honor that for now. I think it's stupid. I love how, like, Thune, for instance. Is it Tune or Thune? I think it's Thune. Commented on how he was able to pay everything on $6 an hour back in, when we were all kids. Well, some of us were teenagers like me. And I remember those days of making $6 an hour, and that was actually quite a lot of money at the time. If you were making $6 an hour, you were pretty much, up the ladder in the restaurant business. Jeez, $24 an hour now. That's why. It felt like, well, yeah, I wish I could have made $6 an hour. So, and they used to take money out for meals and uniforms. You had to wash your uniform. They didn't, wash it for you. You had to wash it yourself, and they charged you for it. Okay, thanks. At least I have a job. So, $24 an hour. And they're whining that $15 an hour is just too much for the hoi polloi. if we allow the hoi polloi to get a guaranteed amount of money, they will be lazy. They won't work because they are guaranteed the money. Well, at the same time, they say CEOs should have unlimited amount of pay because if you don't guarantee them a fortune before they've even worked an hour, you're not going to be able to attract that kind of talent. I don't know. Maybe the reason I'm not a big mogul is because I run business a little bit differently. If you need somebody so badly, I don't think you need them that badly. Okay. I know how business works, and I know that people bring certain talents at the top and can really impact the bottom line, but I still haven't figured out really why a CEO can command the funds that they do. I just still beyond me. Anyway, because I'll tell you why. They have a lot of underlings that do a lot of the work too, right? Right. So they're being treated as if they're Babe Ruth, Willie Mays. In fact, Willie Mays didn't command that kind of pay, even though he was the top of the game. Okay, well, what are you going to do? I guess live within the system you got until you can change it to the way it should be. And you should never use should. I was told that once. Well, it would be a more and better democracy. More and better? A more perfect union is what I'm trying to stammer. And if we just work at it, we don't give up. Oh, other news is that we're doing a bit of saber rattling, and I know it's warmongering has been bantered about. I might argue that this proportional response is pretty low to have some get back for our troops being killed. I wouldn't call this limited proportional response as warmongering, but it is, shall we say, putting a line in the sand. And maybe Joe's got to do that. What I worry about is that we as Democrats, back in the day, liberals and Democratic voters and legislators and leadership were considered to be, commies, sort of like how they consider us now. So many Democratic leaders thought they had to go above and beyond being anti-commie. And they went out and proved it. And, I don't know, 44,000 Americans killed in Vietnam to prove you're not a commie is, I don't know, you don't need to go that far, right? So, we run a risk of maybe, stirring the pot. But I think Assad and Putin have stirred the pot enough. And we might argue that Syria is a sovereign country. Well, so what? They're so sovereign, they got Putin helping them. And if you're going to have these militias inside your borders, and, there's going to be a proportional response. It's not like we bombed Syria. It's not like we bombed Damascus. It's not like we bombed any of it. We bombed a few buildings housing these militias, and pretty much a low-profile thing. Some might say, oh, well, it's all about manners. Joe isn't out there, glowering about what a great military mind he is and everything else that you would expect the Golden Bob's big boy calf to be bellowing at CPAC, which he will be doing, if he's not already. So I'll just say I don't like war. I like the idea of not, having military part of the diplomacy, but I don't know. Carry a big stick. Sometimes you need it. All right. Well, we've got a day ahead of us here in the curated part of the show. And at the top, hey, now, the way that Mitch McConnell spoke about, well, we're gonna embrace our titular head. I mean, we've got a golden calf in the form of a gilded Bob's Big Boy They brought that to CPAC, and they're going to, I don't know, honor it, dance around it. Because that's where they are now. And Mitch McConnell, the Grim Reaper, still presiding over the place where democracy goes to die, because I guess that's what God put him there for. It wasn't God. I'm going to tell you. It was not God that put Mitch McConnell where he is. If you're going to go into that cosmological construct, I think it's something a little more Dante-esque, shall we say. Yeah, you make a pact with you-know-who. You might be getting some hot feet in a little while. Anyway, Mitch McConnell has pretty much said the Republican Party is the insurgent, racist white party, and they are hitching their white wagon to Donald Trump and all that he brings. And what does he bring? A lot of laundered Russian rubles, I'll say that. So we bombed some militias, Iranian-backed militias, who were responsible for the killing of our troops. Let's not forget that. It's not out of a vacuum. Oh, we're just going to do it because we want to. Oh, let me also say one other thing, because I used to fall into this trap all the time. Like, each of these bombs that we dropped cost X amount of dollars, and it could have funded X amount of schools, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The argument might also be made this: it's not like you're getting charged each time you drop a bomb. They're already paid for, all right? It's already been taken from the schools, if you want to look at it that way, which I would sometimes do. But it's not like, oh, I dropped a bomb, I better charge it in the cash register and take some money out. It's already been taken out. And I'll even argue that the replacements for those bombs have already been accounted for, too, on the ledger. It's not that we should be using them, but to say that this bomb cost X amount of bucks and it could have funded this amount of schools, I know. But it could have funded those X amount of schools a long time ago. Not now. We're on that, okay? We're on that right now, in spite of the fact of all the roadblocks put up by the previous administration, right down to an embedded deep state. Even Stephen Miller out there undermining Joe Biden, putting out, oh, Joe Biden is a baby. He's a baby cager, worse than we could have ever been. He doesn't say we. He doesn't bring up the fact that they did it. But you know what? There are still kids that have not been able to be with their moms and dads. We haven't linked them up yet. But 600 kids, or how many it was, is quite a good amount in 30-some-odd days. They're not being locked up and being tortured in icebox baby gulags. I will say that the facilities themselves have been repurposed so that they can have social distancing. They don't have to sleep outside in a tent if they're lucky to have a tent. And what are you going to do? Just push them over the border and say, no, we're not going to take care of you? There's a big difference between caring for kids coming across the border and using them as, I don't know, some sort of weird pawn in some sort of weird authoritarian game of race. Stephen Miller, you're a Nazi and you should be in jail. Okay, what's on the rest of the menu? Well, at the top, that was Rachel breaking down that the D.C. office of the D.C. Federal Prosecutor's Office is reviewing the footage of congressional members. Would it be somebody like an MTG? Could it be somebody like Squeaky? Others. I'm looking at you, John Kennedy, pool of a Confederacy of dunces. I don't think he did, but I think he's still a part of it, as well as others. They're all on tape. And apparently there's some security cameras that even members of Congress weren't so readily aware of, especially newbies. Come to make their mark on democracy. On the rest of the menu, in the wake of the Breonna Taylor killing, the Kentucky Senate unanimously passed a bill to restrict no-knock warrants. Republicans are upset Biden's COVID relief plan would help struggling libraries because who needs a library? And Wisconsin hunters killed nearly double the number of wolves that the state allotted. Well, I don't know. You put a gun in a hunter's hand, I guess they're going to use it, right? Right. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a Belarusian court sentenced an anti-government protester to 10 years in prison on trumped-up charges to keep Lukashenko in power. And a German citizen was charged with espionage for passing the floor plans of the Bundestag to Russian military intelligence. Why does that sound familiar? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. The bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link right there by the social media scroll, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring Patreonage helps us pay our bills and fulfill our civic duty of resisting as the founders originally intended. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, we will stretch those dollars, and we will pay our bills, and then we will fly under the radar as we've been doing for almost 10 years now of continuous 24/7, 365 resistance broadcast radio on the internet. and I got to tell you, in some quarters, it's out there on terrestrial radio too. So there you go. Anyway, thank you for being so generous, and thank you to those of you who might be generous in the future. I should make mention that our snoozing sous chef is really hard at work right now. I don't know if you can tell. I was actually marveling that I guess one mellows with age, because there was a time in my more youthful adulthood I would have demanded a much more, shall we say, orderly canine participation. But now he's just I can't stop him. Who can? He's an English bulldog. Anyway, we love him, and I love him lots. Okay, if you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Hey, did you hear that Twitter's starting to think about charging people for content? Okay, I don't know where that's going, but you can follow all of us on Twitter. Until then, I don't know what's going to happen when that happens. Anyway, you can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Okay, our snoozing sous chef is taking a break from working right now. He's a lot quieter, but I'm sure he's going to get hard to work in just a moment. Oh, yes, we love our gunner. Okay, let's get into this first offering here out of the Associated Press as we start off in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the Diner of Life. A bill that would limit the use of no-knock warrants passed the Kentucky Senate unanimously yesterday, Thursday, the latest effort to reform law enforcement tactics after the death of Breonna Taylor, a woman who was fatally shot when Louisville police broke down her door in the middle of the night. And she was totally innocent. They went to the wrong house, and then they tried to blame her for her own death. The proposal mandates that no-knock warrants would only be issued if there was clear and convincing evidence that the crime alleged is a crime that would qualify a person, if convicted, as a violent offender. The warrants would also have to be executed between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. That would be nice. The measure now awaits House input. Now, as we all know, Taylor, a black woman, was shot in her home multiple times by police during a botched drug raid that occurred after midnight last March. Her death launched a series of protests over the summer and into the fall, with many demonstrators calling on state and national officials to ban no-knock warrants. You know, the apparently violent protests that caused our cities to burn all summer. Our major cities were awash with violence and flames and Really? No, they weren't. Peaceful protests because of a killing of a citizen. We're not talking about, they botched a drug raid and killed the perp. And it comes to light, actually, that some of their strategy was to really rattle the cages of the other people living around there. A grand jury indicted one officer on wanton endangerment charges in September for shooting into a neighbor's apartment. Of course, the neighbor was white, so they're going to get some legal and civil relief, of course. But no officers were charged in connection with Breonna's death. Police had a no-knock warrant, but said they knocked and announced their presence before entering Taylor's apartment, a claim some witnesses have disputed. And, of course, no drugs were found in Taylor's apartment because she's an EMT studying to be a nurse. If the law had been in place and the officers followed it, this young lady would be here, said Republican Senate President Robert Stevers, who sponsored the bill. Josh Israel of the American Independent brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Congressional Republicans are railing against a relatively small line item in President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic relief legislation that would help libraries, demanding that the measly $200 million be cut from a bill that they oppose anyway. It looks like Brian Mast, that little pug from Florida. He wants the $200 million from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to be cut. Looks like New Mexico Rep. Yvette Harrell wants the $200 million cut. These are all in tweets, by the way. Even Marsha Blackburn's gotten in on the rant here. She wants the $200 million. Oh, I'm sorry. She says that the Democrats' COVID relief wish list included $355 million for arts, museums, and library services, because who needs arts, museums, or library services? A society is judged by their arts, museums, and library services, and if that's the case, of course the maggots wouldn't want any of it. They don't want to be judged by intelligence. Sophistication and refinement? That's the least of what they want to be known for. A Tuesday tweet from the Senate Republican Conference ridiculed the $200 million for museums and libraries in the so-called American Rescue Plan. The line item would provide the funds for the Institute of Museum and Library Services, an independent federal agency that provides grants and support to carry out Library Services and Technology Act. The program provides financial backing to state, local, school, research, and other libraries around the country. Think of that. A measly $200 million to fund an act. Many state and local governments have been struggling financially during the pandemic due to declining revenues and increasing public health costs. Public libraries, often among the first things government cut in tough times, have seen significant budget cuts. Republicans are wrong to suggest that library funding is unrelated to curbing the pandemic. In addition to relying on libraries as community centers for access to books, research databases, free internet access, and a warm place to sit, many Americans have used libraries in recent weeks to sign up for coronavirus vaccine appointments. Most libraries have given space to vaccination sites in their facilities. The congressional GOP also attacked the legislation for providing emergency relief for workers in the arts and humanities, communities hit especially hard by the pandemic. They dismissed these fundings as earmarked for miscellaneous projects unrelated to COVID. Republican lawmakers have so far been unanimous in their opposition to the relief bill, despite polls showing massive public support for it. Richmond of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Wisconsin hunters and trappers killed nearly double the number of wolves that the state allotted for a week-long season, and they did it so quickly that officials ended the hunt after less than 3 days. Non-tribal hunters and trappers registered 216 wolves as of Thursday afternoon yesterday, blowing past the state's kill target of 119. The State Department of Natural Resources estimated before the hunt that there were about 1,000 wolves in the state. Its population goal for the animal is 350. The wolf season began Monday and was supposed to run through Sunday, but the department shut it down on Wednesday afternoon as it became clear hunters would exceed the target. Hunters and trappers were given a 24-hour grace period, allowing them to remain in the field until Thursday afternoon. Hunters and trappers also exceeded their kill targets in the 3 previous wolf seasons, but never by more than 10 animals. This is a deeply sad and shameful week for Wisconsin. Megan Nicholson, director of the Wisconsin chapter of the Humane Society of the United States, said in a statement, "This week hunt proves that now more than ever, gray wolves need federal protections restored to protect them from short-sighted and lethal state management." Department officials said nearly 90% of the hunters used dogs to chase down wolves, and fresh snow on Monday and Tuesday aided in tracking. The state sold over 1,500 permits, which equates to 13 hunters or trappers per wolf, the highest ratio of any wolf season so far. Now, state officials aren't worried that the wolf population overall has been harmed, calling Wisconsin's wolves very robust. When department officials were planning the hunt, they decided that the population could sustain between 200 and 220 deaths and remain stable. Assuming that the Ojibwa Indians kill no wolves, the department came close to hitting that mark, state officials said. Wolf management has been one of the most contentious outdoor issues Wisconsin has grappled with in the last 20 years. Farmers and rural residents complain wolves attack livestock and pets and insist that hunting is the only way to control the apex predators. Conservationists counter that the population is still too fragile to support hunting and the animals are too beautiful to be killed. I would also say they're an integral part to the ecology, please. All right. That brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Taking Root. Minari takes a familiar theme, an immigrant family building a life for themselves in America, and sets it in the 1980s South. The film, the fifth from director Lee Isaac Chung, is roughly based on his own childhood experiences. It tells the story of Korean immigrants Jacob and Monica, who along with their two children and later Monica's mother, Soon Ja, set out to realize Jacob's dream of starting a vegetable farm. It's Jacob's dream, as Monica is less than enthused to move her family, including their two young children, David and Ann, from the West Coast to a rickety trailer in rural Arkansas. Her reluctance is even more understandable as young David has a heart condition that the couple's told will need surgery down the road. Racism isn't so much of a factor in the story, but it's obvious that the family are outsiders in a place that's nothing like the home they left. The Walking Dead's Stephen Yeun and Korean actress Han Yi-ri, who played Jacob and Monica, and are joined by veteran character actor Will Patton as Paul, an eccentric local Korean war vet who advises Jacob on farming issues and develops a friendship with the family. It's clear that their faith, evangelical Christianity, plays a big role in the family's life, especially in Jacob's desire to prove his worth as a man. An exit to Sacranville could easily happen here, but with a touching script, fine acting, and stunning cinematography, Chung doesn't let that happen. Jacob ultimately has to weigh his dream in light of his love for his family, as happens for so many, and the associated struggles lead them all to a different place. One where the Korean herb seeds, the Minari seeds that Soon Ja and the kids plant in the Arkansas dirt, appear to take root. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Pakina Maimer. Whether you're a pro gamer or you dip your toes into that world every once in a while, chances are you got stuck while playing a video game once, or was even gloriously defeated by one. I know I have. Maybe in your frustration, you kicked the console a little. Maybe you took it out on the controllers, or, if you're an 80s kid like me, made the joystick pay. Now, a group of computer scientists from Uber AI are taking revenge for all of us who've been in this situation before. Using a family of simple algorithms tagged Go Explore, they went back and beat some of the most notoriously difficult Atari games, whose chunky blocks of pixels and 8-bit tunes had once challenged, taunted, and even enraged us. But what does revisiting those games from the 80s and 90s accomplish, besides fulfilling a childhood fantasy? According to the scientists who published their work in Nature, experimenting with solving video games that require a complex, hard exploration gives way to better learning algorithms. They become more intelligent and perform better under real-world scenarios.
One of the nice things of Go Explorer is that it's not just limited to video games, but that you can also apply it to practical applications like robotics.
That was Joost Hazenga, one of the principal researchers at Uber AI. Joost developed Go Explorer with Adrian Ekefet and other scientists. So how does it actually work? Let's start with the basics. When AI processes images of the world in the form of pixels, it does not know which changes should count and which should be ignored. For instance, a slight change in the pattern of the clouds in the sky in a game environment is probably unimportant when exploring said game. But finding a missing key certainly is. But to the AI, both involve changing a few pixels in that world. This is where deep reinforcement learning comes in. It's an area of machine learning that helps an agent analyze an environment to decide what matters and which actions count through feedback signals in the form of extrinsic and intrinsic rewards.
This is something that animals basically constantly do. You can imagine if you touch a hot stove, you immediately get a strong negative feedback signal like, hey, that's something you shouldn't do in the future. If you eat a bar of chocolate, assuming you like chocolate, you immediately get a positive feedback signal like, hey, maybe I should seek out chocolate more in the future. The same is true for machine learning. These are problems where the agent has to take some actions and then maybe it wins a game.
Creating an algorithm that can navigate rooms with traps, obstacles to jump over, rewards to collect, and pitfalls to avoid means that you have to create an artificial intelligence that is curious and that can explore an environment in a smart way. This helps it decide what brings it closer to a goal or how to collect hard-to-get treasures. Reinforcement learning is great for that, but it isn't perfect in every situation.
In practice, reinforcement learning works very well if you have very rich feedback. If you can tell, hey, this move is good, that move is bad. This move is good, that move is bad.
In Atari games like Montezuma's Revenge, the game environment offers little feedback, and its rewards can intentionally lead to dead ends. Randomly exploring the space just doesn't cut it.
You could imagine, and this is especially true in the video games like Montezuma's Revenge, that sometimes you have to take a lot of very specific actions. You have to dodge hazards, jump over enemies, and you can imagine that a random action is like, hey, maybe I should jump here in this new place is just going to lead to a game over because that was a bad place to jump. And this is especially if you're already fairly deep into the game. And so let's say you want to explore level 2. If you start taking random actions in level 1 and just randomly dying, you're not going to make progress on exploring level 2.
You can't rely on intrinsic motivation alone, which in the context of artificial intelligence typically comes from exploring new or unusual situations.
Let's say you have a robot and it can go left into a house and right into a house. Let's say at first it goes left, it explores left. It means that it gets this intrinsic reward for a while. It doesn't quite finish exploring left, and at some point the episode ends and it starts anew in the starting room. And this time it goes right. It goes fairly far into the room on the right. It doesn't quite explore it. And then it goes back to the starting room. Now the problem is, because it has gone both left and right, and basically has already seen the start, it no longer gets as much intrinsic motivation from going there.
In short, it stops exploring and counts that as a win. Detaching from a place that was previously visited after collecting a reward does not work in difficult games, because you might leave out important clues. Go Explore goes around this by not rewarding some actions, such as going somewhere new. Instead, it encourages sufficient exploration of a space with no or little hints by enabling its agent to explicitly remember promising places or states in a game. Once the agent keeps a record of that state, it can then reload it and intentionally explore, what Adrian and Yost call the first return, then explore principle. According to Adrian, leaning on another form of learning called imitation learning, where agents can mimic human tasks, their AI can go a long way, especially in the field of robotics.
In some cases, you have a difference between the world that you can train in and sort of like the real world. So one example would be if you're doing robotics. In robotics, it's possible to have simulations of your robotics environments. But of course, you want your robot to run in the real world, right? What you can do then, if you're in a situation like that, of course, the simulation is not exactly the same as the environment. So just having something that works in simulation is not necessarily sufficient. And then pretty much, we show that in our work, but really what we're doing is we're using existing algorithms that are called, imitation learning. And what it is it just takes an existing solution to a problem and just makes sure that you can reliably use that solution even when, there are slight variations in your environment, including, it being the real world rather than a simulation.
Adrian and Yost say their model's strength lies in its simplicity. It can be adapted and expanded easily into real-life applications such as language learning or drug design. That was 60 Second Science, and this is Pakina Maimer. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
This Civil Liberties Minute remembers Diana Ortiz, the American nun who was tortured in Guatemala. If there are kids around, you probably should turn off your radio or device right now. It was 1989, and Sister Diana was serving as a missionary in the western highlands of Guatemala, teaching indigenous children. Guatemala was under the thumb of a right-wing military dictatorship that targeted indigenous people. Sister Ortiz was abducted by a Guatemalan security force who repeatedly gang-raped her and burned her back with cigarettes in more than 100 places. And then they hung her by her wrists over a pit filled with bodies of men, women, and children, mostly dead, but some still alive and some decapitated. Years later, she still smelled those decapitated bodies in that pit. The rapes made her pregnant, and she had an abortion. There was even worse torture. And it only stopped because an American who appeared to be in charge eventually ordered her release. Sister Diana lived and became an advocate known worldwide for victims of torture. Her case helped reveal decades-long American covert action in Guatemala, and declassified documents revealed that Guatemala security forces, equipped and trained by the United States, had committed acts of genocide. A friend of Sister Diana's described her as a woman of incredible courage and integrity who literally came back from the dead. Sister Diana Ortiz passed in February of 2021 from cancer at the age of 62. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
If it's class warfare, we're the People's Army. You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day the Battle at Bethlehem began. 14,000 workers at Bethlehem Steel's Lackawanna Mill in Buffalo, New York, walked out on strike. The Steelworkers Organizing Committee, or SWOC, had been fighting to organize Little Steel for years. Little Steel was a general term that referred to the smaller mills like Republic, Inland, Bethlehem, and Youngstown Sheet and Tube. At Bethlehem, SWOC was still waiting for a decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals about the company union Bethlehem refused to give up in defiance of the Wagner Act. As a defense industry, Bethlehem had $1.5 billion worth of armament orders to fill, and yet they wouldn't even pay the legal minimum wage mandated for government contracts. Retired steelworker Mitchell Schaefer recalled in a 1991 interview, "I went to work there in the late 30s, swinging a 20-pound sledgehammer to break iron billets." The 81-year-old continued by saying, "I got 40 cents an hour, 6 days a week, no vacations." The last straw came when Bethlehem fired over 1,000 workers. Bethlehem claimed these particular workers damaged coke ovens when they engaged in a work stoppage. Workers immediately formed solid picket lines at 7 gates that stretched 2 miles. they successfully beat back attempts by police to allow scabs to cross their picket line. After 38 hours, Bethlehem quickly agreed to reinstate the 1,000 workers. They soon resumed talks regarding wage increases, grievance procedures, and union recognition. But a month later, Bethlehem decided to go back on their promises. They started organizing elections for collective bargaining representatives through their company union. The stage was set for the next big strike at Bethlehem in March that would finally win union recognition.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Hey, did you know we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life? We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 36 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy skies, and only expecting a high near 42 to 45. Winds will be out of the west-northwest in about an hour at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and we'll be bringing a mixture of rain and snow showers later on this afternoon into tonight, with lows in the low 30s. Winds will then be light and variable, and expecting that mix. I don't really have a total of amount, but it looks like it, just from the satellite images, it looks like it could be some. Tomorrow on Saturday, expecting a high in the mid-40s with rain or snow showers in the morning, giving way to partly cloudy skies in the afternoon. Winds light and variable, maybe a little bit of drying out, so to speak, on Sunday, and then possibly snow and rain on Monday and Tuesday. We'll see how that ferrets out. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon now stand at 8,299, with an increase in deceased now at 111. Pollen is rated at none right outside the window here at the mothership in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 33 parts per million, but the daytime UV index is inching up ever so into the moderate range at 3. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.28 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 90%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowd sources from around the world. London is 54 and sunny. Paris is 53 and partly cloudy. Rome is 62 and sunny. Kyiv is 48 and partly cloudy. Kabul is 45 and hazy. Hong Kong is 65 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 44 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees and merely cloudy. San Francisco, California is 46 and sunny, and they feel guilty about it. No, they don't. And New York is a crisp 40 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Matthias Williams and Stephanie Nebehay of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A Belarusian court sentenced an anti-government protester to 10 years in prison yesterday, Thursday, on charges that the opposition says were trumped up as part of a crackdown to keep President Alexander Lukashenko in power. Alexander Karduzhaku was convicted of attempted murder for attacking security forces who were trying to disperse nationwide protests that erupted last August following a contested election that extended Lukashenko's rule since 1994. Of course, this guy has been the only ruler they've had since the fall of the Soviet Union. Karduzhaku denied wrongdoing, according to local media reports, saying he was confronted by two plainclothes security forces who pulled a gun on him in the city of Brest and killed another protester, Hernandez Chateau, as they tried to escape. Chateau, who died after being shot in the back of the head, was convicted of attacking security officials, while the man who shot him was recognized as the victim in the case. In power since 1994, Lukashenko has launched a violent crackdown on protesters that has triggered new Western sanctions on Minsk, but support from Russia. Top United Nations human rights official Michelle Bachelet warned of a human rights crisis of unprecedented dimension in the country, saying 246 people have been sentenced to jail on allegedly politically motivated charges as of February 9th. At the same meeting of the UN Human Rights Council, 42 countries, including the United States, condemned what they called systemic and massive human rights violations in Belarus.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous staff at the Associated Press bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A German man has been charged with espionage for passing information on properties used by the German parliament to Russian military intelligence, prosecutors said yesterday, Thursday. The suspect, identified only as Jans F., in line with German privacy rules, worked for a company that had been repeatedly contracted to check portable electrical appliances by the Bundestag, or the lower house of parliament, prosecutors said in a statement. As a result of that, he had access to PDF files with floor plans of the properties involved. The Bundestag is based in the Reichstag building, a Berlin landmark, but also uses several other sites. Prosecutors said at some point before early September of 2017, the suspect decided of his own accord to give information on the properties to Russian intelligence. They said he sent the PDF files to an employee of the Russian embassy in Berlin who was an officer with Russia's GRU military intelligence agency. They didn't specify how his activities came to light because otherwise that would reveal methods and practices. The charges against the suspect, who is not in custody, were filed at a Berlin court on February 12th. The court will have to decide whether to go ahead with a trial. Relations between Germany and Russia have been buffeted by a growing list of issues, in recent years. In October, the EU imposed sanctions on 2 Russian officials and part of the GRU agency over a cyber attack against the German parliament in 2015. In addition, a Russian man accused of killing a Georgian man in broad daylight in downtown Berlin on Moscow's orders in 2019 is on trial in Berlin currently. And last year's poisoning of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who was flown to Germany for treatment and then arrested immediately after he returned to Russia, has added another layer of tensions. Indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week, but we will meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here on Monday, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.